Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session on the working groups of the Just Transition platform. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. My name is Jan Maarten de Vet, and I'm here from the Secretariat, the new Secretariat of the Just Transition platform. It's a real pleasure to have you with us, together with the fine colleagues today. So we just heard, of course, the opening session with the Director General, Mark Lemaitre, and the statements of the two commissioners. So that is already setting quite a bit of the scene. There are a lot of messages coming through. It shows the enormous interest in the exercise in these meetings, but also on how are we going to do this, how to implement the Just Transition. And there were some very interesting words actually used in the opening session, what not to do. And the one I recall is we should not go for traumatic transition. And indeed, you know, the transitions, regional economic transitions, is nothing new. They have been there for 100 years, if not more. But this time we want to get it right. And as we all know, of course, the challenges ahead are, I would say, really mega challenges, because the transition we talk about now is not only an energy transition, not only an environmental transition, but also an industrial transition, an economic transition, and last but not least, a social transition. So all those transitions together make it very complex to get it right for industries, sectors, and for the regions that we will talk about today. So the initiative hereby of the European Commission is to actually get together to start the implementation of these territorial Just Transition plans with the regions most concerned and the actors most concerned, and to do that in a number of different groups. And as we heard already, the groups will be a horizontal one for all stakeholders. There will be a group specific to steel. There will be a group specific to chemicals. And last but not least, there is also a group on cement. And of course, there will be questions already on why these and why not others, etc., etc. That's all very exciting. And that is something, of course, where we can discuss about and that we can exchange. And like in the previous session, feel free to use the chat function. It works very fine, and it really allows you to pose the questions. And we'll do our very best to get those questions onto the stage, onto the scene, indeed, in a minute, as fast as we can. We have a session of 90 minutes, which is a good size to really get to the bottom of things, and hopefully enough to also keep the attention span right. So we will have a very exciting program for you to go through. And in a minute, I will give the floor to the representative from the Commission, Sander Happert, to introduce the idea of these working groups. We will then have a presentation of the OECD to give us already some ideas of the findings, early emerging findings on the research that they are carrying out right on this topic. And then we will get the presentation of the working groups. We will have a presentation of the 4 working groups and the working group leaders from the Secretariat, as well as a number of members of the groups who have already been selected and who are in the starting position to start these groups running. So it's a very exciting moment indeed to do this. And of course, there will be opportunities later on in the week for those members of those groups to start the real discussion in those sessions. So indeed, feel free, as I mentioned, to use that chat. I can see already the questions coming in the chat. That's very good. Perhaps just one word about ourselves. I said my name is Jan Maarten de Vet. I'm heading the new Secretariat of the Just Transition platform. It's a real pleasure to do that with a wonderful team of people. You will meet many of them. And just for you to know, what is this platform doing? Well, we will be organizing, we will supporting these working groups, which is a very important task of our work. But we will also be organizing events such as today's event. We will have communication elements, and we will also carry out pieces of research, all of it to support, to give a push to the platform and we do, of course, that together in wonderful collaboration with the Secretariat for the for the coal regions in transition, which has been running already for quite a while. So I would say, without further ado, if that's all right with you, I would like to really give the floor to Sander Happard. Sander Happard is from DG Regio, and a unit which I think it has a fantastic name. It's a Smart and Sustainable Growth Unit. And it would be very good to hear, Sander, why the Commission has taken the initiative to set up those groups, what's the idea, and to have your pitch as a start of this session. Over to you, Sander, on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, and hello to everyone. I'm very happy to be here in the fourth meeting of the Just Transition Platform, and I'm very happy to see that you are already so active on the first day of our meeting. So indeed, as Jan said, I work also at DG Regio, where I coordinate the work on the Just Transition Fund. I have a few slides, which I hope will appear on the screen. So this session is on the launch of the working groups on carbon intensive regions, and these working groups, they fit really well in the Just Transition Platform. So as you know, the Just Transition Platform, of which we're now having the meeting, is there to support all relevant stakeholders that are involved in the preparation or implementation of the Just Transition mechanism, including the Just Transition Fund. So this relates both to stakeholders in coal regions, but also in carbon intensive regions. The working groups specifically focus on the carbon intensive regions. I am not sure if my slides are visible. Yes, now they are. So if you could please go to the next one. So this is indeed positioning the working groups within the broader work of the Just Transition Platform, of which Jan leads the new Secretariat, which will give us support on the working groups, but also on other elements that we are putting in place for the Just Transition Platform. So I was mentioning these carbon intensive regions. If you could go to the next slide, please. Here you can see, in fact, the Commission's proposals, the Commission's initial analysis of which territories should, in our view, receive support from the Just Transition mechanism. These regions are either in red, the coal regions, peat regions, or oil shale regions, which will face a decline in these fossil fuel industries, or carbon intensive regions. These are regions that are heavily dependent on carbon intensive industries, which you can see in orange. And the regions marked in blue are regions that are both carbon intensive and coal regions. So turning to the next slide, we believe that the challenges for the Just Transition in these carbon intensive regions are different from the ones that affect, for instance, coal regions. Because the carbon intensive industries, we do not expect them to decline, or we do not want them to disappear from Europe. But in order to be in line with the transition to a climate neutral economy in 2050, these sectors will have to undergo very significant transformations. So we are speaking of industries that are very high, that have a very high intensity of greenhouse gas emissions, such as steel, metals, cement, chemicals, paper, pulp, ceramics, or others. So the JTF, and this is one of the unique features of the Just Transition mechanism, will also support territories that are heavily dependent on these industries. And in order to receive support, these territories have to be dependent on such industries, and they also have to demonstrate, and this is something that we are expecting to see in the territorial Just Transition plans, that they experience a negative impact from the transition to climate neutral economy, and that this impact is visible or felt in the territory by 2030 or before. And then when looking at the Just Transition Fund regulation, or also the staff working document that we published several weeks ago, these impacts could be related to social impacts, for instance, Even though we do not hope or expect carbon-intensive industries to decline, it may be so that certain technological changes lead to unemployment because certain technological solutions for the climate-neutral economy may be less labor-intensive, but certainly also significant needs for reskilling. So this is a very clear social impact of the transition. There could be also economic impacts linked to the significant changes that these industries will undergo in their production patterns, for instance, and there could also be other impacts. For instance, if a steel industry in a very sparsely populated part of Europe needs new skills and other types of workers, this may be a very clear demographic challenge that the transition is putting on such a region. Next slide, please. But when we look at these challenges that we expect carbon-intensive regions to have, we are faced with certain knowledge gaps. And this is quite apparent if you compare these challenges, for instance, with the coal regions, where we know that, for example, there has already been an initiative running from the European Commission since several years, with several studies and several other support that is already underway. For carbon-intensive regions, this is much less the case. So this is where the Just Transition Platform will also help, and this is where these working groups can help, because first of all, we would like to know more about which specific impacts will these pathways in carbon-intensive industries have. So some time ago, we already published the first study that tried to calculate the regional employment impact of, for instance, EU ETS installations, so from the emissions trading scheme, where, of course, several carbon-intensive regions are linked to. And after my presentation now, we will hear from an ongoing study that the OECD is doing for us on regional industrial transitions to climate neutrality, about the sectors, locations, and socioeconomic impacts of some of these industries. And what we also have a knowledge gap on is on what is actually the human impact on this transition, what is the social impact, because when we speak about carbon-intensive industries in the context of the climate transition, we are very often speaking about technological changes, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, or other ways of making industries climate neutral, and we will still speak about them. But what we are in DG Regio and in the context of the Just Transition Fund interested in also is to really know what kind of impact will those technological changes have on the people and places of the regions that are heavily dependent on these industries. So this is really also where and why we have launched the working groups, or why we are launching now the working groups, because we really want to know from everyone in these regions, in these industries, what will be the impact of the transition in those regions and on the people there. So this is why we have launched the working groups, and where we are hoping that the stakeholders will come together to exchange on solutions for a just transition and identify good practices on how to make the climate transition in those regions fair and socially acceptable for all. So this is really what I wanted to say as sort of an introduction to this session, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing this with you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Sander. Very insightful, very concise. 3 things that stick with me when I listen to you carefully. First of all, you say the difference with the coal regions is, of course, that these industries are not to disappear, but only to go through transformation, right? Which is a radical change, indeed a very drastic change compared to the discussions that we just heard about 2032, 2033. It's a very different type of discussion indeed. Second point, indeed, the focus on people and places, right? Because of course the industries and the sectors that we talk about, they in themselves have been studied over the years, but looking at this people and places component, that seems to be really quite new. Very interesting to pursue that in the exchanges in the working groups. And thirdly, and the slides says it very clearly, addressing knowledge gaps, right? So that is, of course, a very nice bridge also to our next presenter. But before doing that, I see things going on in the chat. One question, a practical question is: are the slides made available? And the answer is yes, the slides you will see will be made available. So no need to pencil everything down. There are other questions in the chat, but I hope we'll come back to that. So please continue whilst you hear the presentations to make use of the chat. So we all know the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, working on both industry, broader economic, as well as social and regional questions. So it's really good to hear from Andres Fuentes Hoekfilter and Jolien Noels to already give us a glimpse of the study that you are working on exactly on this topic, regional industrial transitions to climate neutrality. And bear in mind that what I always find very interesting when listening to OECD, the OECD of course has a broader perspective, right? As there are also so many members from non-EU countries. So it's very good to have your perspective on this question and to see how you can help us move forward with this work. Over to you, Andres.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our work on regional industrial transitions. Here in the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities of the OECD. The motivation for this work is really quite simple. Some of the economic activities that are most difficult to make climate neutral are in manufacturing. The transformations needed for climate neutrality are particularly deep in some of the manufacturing sectors. And these activities are typically regionally concentrated. Where these activities are concentrated sometimes relates to regions' access to energy, raw materials, and transport infrastructure. Yet, energy sources, raw materials, and transport will be different with net zero emissions than they are today. So these transformations will have implications for regional employment. We cannot yet determine what the implications exactly will be like, but we can say which regions may be most concerned. And so on the next slide, with the next slide, I wish to say thank you very much to the Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy in the European Commission for supporting our work. On the next slide, you can see that we have chosen 5 sectors facing particularly deep transformations to analyze them further. We have selected these sectors according to the NACE classification of economic activities, because this is what allows us to get to the employment numbers. Now, for the regions, employment data are often available only at the 2-digit NACE level of classification, which is fairly aggregate. The activities are often nested within these 2-digit sectors. As you can see on this chart, in the European Union as a whole, the 5 selected 2-digit industries are not among the biggest employers. The biggest one is the manufacture of other non-metallic mineral products, which notably includes cement, followed by the manufacture of chemicals and chemical products, as well as basic metals, and then the manufacture of paper and paper products. The production of coke and refined petroleum is a small employer in the European Union as a whole. And then on the next slide, you can see the three-digit breakdown of employment and emissions in these broadly defined sectors. So, for example, in the production of non-metallic minerals, which is the NACE class 23, cement, as you can see, is by far the most emission intensive. Employment with a NACE 23 is larger in the manufacturing of glass and glass products, where transformation challenges are significant but smaller. Similarly, in the manufacture of basic metals, emissions are concentrated in basic iron and steel. So one conclusion that I would like to offer to you already now is that more granular employment data by sectors would facilitate the analysis of regional employment challenges. As I show on the following slide, there is a large literature to describe the needed production technologies. And well, I do not show them on the slide because it's really a very large and rich literature, but what I do show here is just a few high-level characteristics of these sector-specific transformations that may have particular place-based implications. So, for example, in the production of refined oil products and coke, well, this is a sector that is likely to face the biggest relative employment loss, simply because fossil fuel use needs to be phased out. Cement is the sector among the chosen ones that is the most dependent on carbon capture and storage, most likely, because technologies to eliminate process emissions are less well developed. Chemicals and steel may be able to do without carbon capture and storage, but hydrogen demand will be particularly high, especially in the production of basic chemicals. Hydrogen is needed as a raw material in chemicals and as a source of high temperature heat in both sectors. In paper and pulp production will face increasing competition for biomass, a raw material that will become key also in other sectors as we move to climate neutrality. Green hydrogen, produced with emission-free electricity, notably renewables, is hence essential for industrial transitions. Now this map, as this map suggests, the biggest import needs for hydrogen are likely to be in northwestern Europe, so they're regionally different. In northwestern Europe, which is, you can see it with the red color and the dark orange color, because chemicals production in these regions is strong. And in these regions, local renewable electricity generation potential is not sufficient to produce the needed hydrogen. In reality, import needs will be more widespread than shown on this map because hydrogen can be produced more cheaply outside Europe. So the availability of hydrogen for industrial needs, therefore, depends not only on local production, but also on the connection to ports and natural gas pipelines, which will be the most suitable means for transformation. And regions differ in how they are connected to this key infrastructure. Carbon and capture and storage also matters to regions because storage sites may not be where the emissions are that need to be captured and stored. This is especially evident if carbon capture and storage sites, or carbon storage, CO2 storage sites in Europe, were limited to offshore sites. One reason for preferring offshore sites could be that onshore sites may be vulnerable, more vulnerable to resistance by local populations. So this map illustrates, it's purely illustrative, it doesn't suggest that that's how it's going to be, but it illustrates that CO2 transport infrastructure, that the infrastructure needs may differ a lot across regions. And so related costs may be unevenly distributed across regions, but perhaps also pressure to do away with CCS may be stronger in some regions than in others. And these regions may not be the most technologically advanced. So one can think about a number of implications that this might have and that policy may need to address. So summing up, the infrastructure industry requires for climate neutrality has different economic implications and therefore also employment implications across regions in the European Union. And with that, I let Yulin take over to show you some of our work around employment and emissions in these sectors.
Thank you very much, Andres. Next slide, please. So to identify the regions that are vulnerable to the transition to climate neutrality in manufacturing, we use two indicators that measure the intensity of needed transformations, and they are employment shares and emissions per capita. So high regional employment shares indicate where exposure is concentrated, and higher emissions per capita indicate which regions are more exposed to particularly emissions-intensive manufacturing within each sector. Regions with higher emissions per capita, they may be using older, more emissions-intensive technologies and production assets. So therefore, combining these two indicators together, we can identify where the needed transformations due to transition may be the largest. So the map on this slide shows how these two indicators overlap for the example of basic metals manufacturing. And within the basic metals manufacturing, the two subsectors that are particularly of interest and hard to abate are steel and aluminium production. And on the map, you can see the dark purple regions. They have the highest employment shares in basic metals and the highest emissions per capita in steel and aluminium production. So therefore, these purple regions would be the regions with the largest transformation challenges. And as you can see, they are spread across Europe, in Poland, Germany, Italy, for example, but there is a particular concentration in Northern Europe. And if we look at steel emissions in particular, we find that regions with high emissions from steel production are spread across Europe. And we know that there is a scope to convert current steel plants or locations to produce steel using hydrogen, but that would require connecting current assets to hydrogen hubs and networks, which may prove to be challenging seeing the geographical dispersion. Next slide, please. We can do the same exercise for chemical manufacturing or a few other heavy industries as well. In the chemical sector, regions with high employment shares and high emissions per capita tend to overlap. They are mainly in Central and Western Europe. But high employment shares and high emissions per capita, they don't always need to overlap. So for example, if you look at the capital region around Paris, which is colored in bright blue, this region has high employment shares in chemicals, but it does not have high emissions per capita. And this could be due to the type of facilities and occupations that are in this region. So the Parisian region is likely to have the headquarters with administrative facilities rather than production sites, and it likely employs managers and accountants. So these type of occupations, they may still be at risk to some extent, but it's likely that they have skills that are more transferable to other sectors and greener activities. On the other hand, some regions with higher emissions per capita, they may have workers at production facilities, and these workers, they may be most heavily affected by the transition as they work in occupations with specific skills that may not always be suitable in other sectors or in the same sector as we transition to new technologies. Next slide, please. So finally, we are also showing the example of this exercise for the sector of other non-metallic mineral products manufacturing. And this manufacturing sector includes glass, ceramics, and cement. And cement production has been identified as particularly difficult to abate. Therefore, ideally, we would like to analyze employment in this subsector separately from employment in other non-metallic mineral products. However, current employment data doesn't allow to distinguish at more detailed sectoral level, which is what Anders also touched upon. But on the other hand, emissions data does allow to distinguish between cement specific emissions and other emissions from other activities in other non-metallic mineral products. So in this map, we show the overlap between employment shares in other non-metallic mineral products manufacturing and emissions per capita specifically for cement. So in a way, we are assuming that the distribution of employment in manufacture of other non-metallic mineral products is similar to that in cement, which isn't always the case. But once you combine that with cement-related emissions, we can get a better indication of regions that may have cement-related transformation challenges due to the transition. So in the case of cement, regions that may undergo larger transformations are mainly in Central and Eastern Europe. So to conclude, manufacturing activities that are vulnerable to the transition, they tend to be geographically concentrated. And the identification of regions by sector where it is concentrated can help manage a just transition, because although the transition will bring opportunities, these opportunities, they may not arise where current risks are. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much for the presentation. It took me 1 second to unmute. Even in 2021, that can still be a challenge. Deep apologies. Fantastic. So very interesting to hear these early reflections. I think it's good to emphasize this is work in progress. There are questions in the chat whether there is already a publication to look at. That will come, I understand, in the period to come. So of course we'll keep you up to date when that is becoming available. Sander, what do you take from this? Because you'll be following and also commissioning the work. If you see these patterns, does that surprise you? And what is your reaction and possibly also question to the OECD colleagues on what we just saw?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan, and thank you so much to Andres and Jolien for sharing the preliminary data or preliminary results from their ongoing study. There will be indeed a publication which will then be, of course, publicly available. Maybe Andres can share a bit also the timing of that. So what is very interesting from this study and from the super illustrative maps that you have seen is indeed how certain of these carbon intensive industries and the challenges linked to that are so geographically located. So this really justifies the fact that the Just Transition Fund is placed within the overall cohesion policy programming, which has a place-based approach. So this is very good. I think the study that is ongoing will be extremely useful, not only for the working groups that will now start their work, but also for the member states and for the regions, because what we have seen from the ongoing dialogue on the territorial just transition plans, and we will speak about this more in a session tomorrow as well, is that some member states are struggling more than others to really describe the transition and its impacts in these carbon-intensive regions, and this is due to these knowledge gaps that we have spoken about. So this study will already help them a bit more in that sense. And what I think is also crucial, which Jolien and Andres have noted, is that when we are speaking about knowledge gaps, sometimes it's also the data that is unavailable, or that is unavailable at the level at which we would need it. So this again for me also underscores the importance of having very good territorial just transition plans for these carbon intensive regions, so that we can hear from the regions, from the member states, what the exact challenges are in their region, and link to the industries that they have. And then going forward in the implementation, this is also what we hope the working groups will help us with in order to really tailor this to the best extent possible.
Very much. Andres, Jolien, any further thoughts on Sandra's remarks?
They're very encouraging, and therefore I would also like to add that that in the work agenda that we have for the next weeks and months, is in the next weeks to advance in our research and to characterize the regions that have to do some of the heavy stemming, as we have shown in these maps, to characterize them socioeconomically. So what's the socioeconomic context in which they need to undertake these transformations? But also in terms of the characteristics of workers, to the extent that the data will allow to do so, with respect to their education background, with respect to their experience, to be able to characterize the challenges, but also in terms of firms. How well are firms across regions able to adopt the new technologies and finance the needed investment? How does it differ across regions?
Yeah. Andres, perhaps looking at time, one question, actually one compliment comes from the chat, right? Well done on the two-dimensional color schemes. We don't see those every day. Very insightful. Interesting question also from a colleague from UNESCO, I believe, is, I mean, the data you present are of course from the past, right? But would there be a reason to believe these patterns will be radically different if you look ahead? Because many of the challenges that you describe, including, for instance, transition to hydrogen, are yet to come, right? So anything that we can expect from you when it comes to the future? We know OECD likes thinking about the future too. So is there some reflections to come from your side, or is this too, should we manage those expectations? You're muted still, yes.
The transformations will, of course, need to start on the basis of the situation today. So it is important to understand where the employment and where the emissions are today in these sectors. But in our presentation, we've also tried to highlight what is coming up for the future. And so where in the future the hydrogen will be needed, and what it implies. So when we can see what it implies for the location of the economic activities that will require hydrogen, and the same for carbon capture and storage. So this is also, there's this forward-looking element in our work as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic. So, I mean, what I take from it is really it requires both knowledge of the sectors and knowledge of the places to figure out what will be actually the impact for, you know, people and of course, people mostly, and that requires hard work. It requires knowledge. So we look forward to indeed presentation of your study, but also really collaboration and a more intensive work on bringing those angles together. And that is perhaps a good moment to bridge to the second part of our session, which is more hands-on, where we will actually present you the work that will be undertaken in the working groups that we mentioned already, the 4 working groups indeed. So it's a real pleasure to have with me my dear colleague Elodie Sall, who is indeed going to lead on this work stream together with other colleagues. Elodie, are you ready to undertake the work? That's a good question. And second, if so, can you already give headlights on what's yet to come, and also then introduce other colleagues involved, right? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elodie Sal. I'm a member of the Just Transition Platform Secretariat, and I'm pleased today to give you a bit more details about the work of the working groups. So in the next slides, you will see the main objective, actually, of the working groups. So this, as stated also earlier on during the opening session, also during this session, the main objective of the working groups is to establish a cooperation between the European Commission, member states and other stakeholders on matters related to just transition, and more specifically on the implementation of the territorial just transition plans, with, of course, specific focus on the relevant sectors. How we will do that? So we have mainly 3 milestones. Firstly, it will be to gather people around a virtual or actual table of a different group of stakeholders around a specific topic. Secondly, there will be a mission will be to develop a common vision around just transition with stakeholders. So developing, for instance, specific approaches, solutions, tools to face challenges of just transition process and the implementation of the territorial just transition plans. Last but not least, there will be also a definition of a strategic approach on stakeholders engagement. As it was stated before, engaging and involving stakeholders and as many stakeholders as possible is really instrumental in the just transition process. So this will be also one of the main activities of the working groups of the JTP. Next slide, please. So in total, there will be 4 working groups. The first 3 will be sectorial and industry focused, so steel, cement, and chemicals. Each of the working group will have specific outputs, which will be an action plan addressing issues faced by regions implementing low carbon transition. Then there will be a 4th working group focusing more on horizontal stakeholder strategy. So this will be more, let's say, cross-cutting working group, focusing on how to involve more and how to engage more with stakeholders. The main output of this working group will be a strategy, so stakeholder engagement strategy, to involve society in a cross-cutting manner for the implementation of the territorial just transition plans. Now you may wonder who are part of this working groups. So next slide, please. Regarding membership, and you can move to the other slides regarding who are the actual members of the working groups. So first of all, member states authorities, then local and regional authorities representing the territories covered by the territorial just transition plans, with relevance to the specific carbon-intensive sectors. Then we will also welcome umbrella organizations of associations representing regional, local, urban, and other public authorities. Also, organizations representing economic and social partners will be participants and also joining the working groups. And last but not least, also bodies representing civil society, such as NGOs. How it will operate in practice, you will see that in the next slide. We want it to be as inclusive as possible, but still want to work in practice and be as concrete as possible in the implementation of the work of the working groups. So that's why you see on the slide 3 circles. The first one is really for the core members, so active members of each of the working groups. This model is applicable to all 4 working groups. So first circle with the core members, they will actively participate in the activities of the working group. Then there's a second circle, who are, let's say, the close observers, who will take part in some of the work of the working group on an ad hoc basis, such as consultation, for instance. Then there's a third circle of other stakeholders who may not want to be as actively participating as the other members, but still want to be informed of the work and activities of the working groups. So this is the third circle. We've had also call for applications to be member of the working groups, which is closed now. But if you still want to be part of the member, if you still want to be member of the working groups, we invite you also to contact us at Secretariat. We will put in the chat the email address where you can contact us. Next slide, please, on more on timeline and milestones. In the next slide, you will see an overview of different milestones that we are aiming at and implementing for the couple of months and also years ahead. So the most important thing I think to remember from this slide is really to have this 3 phases approach. So with a scoping phase to really discuss among working group members, okay, what are the main priority areas, what are the main objectives of each working group. So this is a scoping phase, including consultation also from stakeholders, so not only working group members from the first circle, for instance. Then we will develop and really think in practice on how to develop some actions for each working group, again with the consultation phase, with different papers that you can see in orange on the slide. And then implementation phase, because it's important also to put into practice what we preach and also to make sure that all the actions that have been and will be developed by working group members are implemented and put into practice. In the next slide, you will see the different, let's say, outcomes and deliverables with different papers. Starting with the scoping paper, outlining the different priority themes of each working group identified by the working group members. There will be also some specific objectives and expected results outlined in this paper. This paper will be followed then by a draft implementation plan with a final implementation plan, the final version of this paper, including different sets of actions that the working group members will agree upon. Then, last but not least, actions, very important, as I said before, how to implement. And this will be also something which will be done by working group members themselves, but also a wider range of stakeholders. Regarding the meetings, in the next slide, as I shown before in the visual before, there will be several meetings starting also this year. So we will to kickstart the work of all the working groups and start also the scoping phase. Each working group will meet twice a year, so twice in 2022 and also twice in 2023, with a different objective also linked to the different outcomes and deliverables that I just outlined. So with the scoping paper, implementation paper, and also implementation of the actions. Whenever possible, of course, the working group meetings will be organized back-to-back with the JTP events. Next slide, please. On the JTP Secretariat, you may wonder what is the JTP Secretariat is doing also related to the working groups. So in the next slide, you will see the different type of support that we are providing to all the working groups. So there are 3 types of levels, let's say, of support. First is strategic support, so to provide advice and guidance and monitor the activities of the working groups and its progress. The second type of support is operational, so to develop templates for deliverables and different papers, provide and manage information to the working group members and monitor the platform. And also, of course, to organize meetings and consultations of the different working groups. Then, last but not least, we will provide also thematic supports. This will be done through, for instance, a needs assessment, but also through the different consultations, but of a collection of good practices and examples to be discussed during the different meetings, specifically focused on the sectors. So now I'm pleased to also invite other members and colleagues from the Secretariat. In the next slides, you will see some faces. It's good to put some indeed faces behind names. So as I said, I'm Elodie Salle. I won't be supporting the Horizon Stakeholder Strategy Working Group, but we have also three other members of the Secretariat that I'm pleased to see also on the slide, and I also hope you can see on the screen soon. So on the working group on chemicals, we will be Jan-Philipp Cramer, then on the working group on steel, Johannes van Jacob, and then the working group on cement, Katja Witte. So I invite the my three colleagues on stage. I hope you can see us now all. So maybe a couple of words from each of you. It's nice to see you on stage. A couple of words from yourself, and also about the main objective, let's say, of the working group that you will be supporting. So Jan-Philipp, perhaps you want to start?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to be here. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Jan Cramer. I'm part of the JTP Technical Secretariat as a team leader for the Chemicals Working Group. And I will also be supporting some of the analytical backstopping that Sander was mentioning earlier when it comes to generating further knowledge about the transformation of the sectors overall that we're dealing with. When it comes to the chemical sector, I think all of us understand the importance of this industry for Europe, for its competitiveness overall, but also the great transition challenges that are lying ahead. And there's some peculiarities about the sector, and the colleagues from the OECD pointed out some of those, in particular the strong concentration and also the long-term investment cycles that we're dealing with, and with this concentration also the strong agglomeration when it comes to the labor force involved and the regional implications. So against this very brief background, in the working group on the chemical sectors, we want to firstly share and generate knowledge from all across Europe about this human and social dimension of the transition, which is very important, as Sander has mentioned. We also want to collect some early best practices, or maybe even promising practices from across the EU, and maybe also other regions, to learn how to best tackle this transition in a fair and socio-economic beneficial way. We want to actually also link into the territorial Just Transition plans and understand how to best find solutions, maybe even what kinds of projects are needed. And for those of you who were listening earlier, we heard some remarks about meaningful projects, coordination of activities, and these things will be very important, and we hope we can support with that. And lastly, the working group will also try to provide some support to the European Commission in identifying the best approaches to the transition, which can be applied also to other regions and other industries potentially. So I'm really looking forward to work with you, and passing on now, I believe, to my colleague Johannes. Sorry.
Thank you, Jan. I hope you can hear me. My name is Johannes van Jacob. I'm working at the Wuppertal Institute here in Germany. I'm co-head of our research unit, Structural Change and Innovation, which is located in the division Future Energy and Industry Systems. And I will be in charge for the Steel Working Group here on this platform. And I'm really looking forward to work with you, as I'm located here in Northern Westphalia, very closely to the Ruhr area. This industrial transformation is not only a job task for me, but also daily life business, as I experience this every day. And I'm really appreciating to have you here and to discuss with you on the challenges to come and put a focus on the social ones. And now I'm handing over to my colleague Katja Witte. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Katja Witte. I will be in charge of the cement group as working group leader, and I'm a social scientist working on the topic of structural change from energy intensive industry for the last years, I think, at the Wuppertal Institute also. And I'm there the co-head of the research unit Structural Change and Innovation, together with Johannes. So the objective of the summit group, I think, is in line with the words from Johannes and Jan-Philipp, also regarding chemicals and steel. The overall mentioned aims are to help stakeholders to get access to the Just Transition mechanism, here especially for cement. And for cement, there are special challenges, as Andres and Jolene already said. The technical possibilities for CO2 reductions are more limited than, for instance, for steel or chemicals. And yes, I'm looking forward to discussing these with you and finding these knowledge gaps, approaches, and also, of course, solutions for the respective regions and the people living there. And I'm very pleased that the EC is promoting such a transdisciplinary and participatory way of working, because I'm sure that this will enable us to address the transition challenges much more better. Thanks.
Thank you very much, three of you. It's very nice to give this sneak peek of the, let's say, the work of the working group. So on that note, I think I can close at least my presentation, Jan Martin, and hand it back to you. And in case there's any question, I'm happy to reply to them later on during the Q&A. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elodie and colleagues. That was very, very insightful. There are, of course, many questions already on the presentations. We see, of course, this process has gone through also the composition of the working group through a call for expression of interest, right? So that's been meticulously scrutinized. And I believe the working groups are not full yet. There are quite some questions. Also, I think one question that struck me is on the outputs of the working groups, right? And I think that was before you presented, Elodie, the slide on the implementation plans. Very interesting to think through what will be the meaning of those implementation plans. And indeed, will they be supporting, will they be helping the policy making, or will there be people helping people on the ground? But perhaps also one thought on that. I mean, perhaps you have an answer already, Elodie, on that question, actually. Or what to use these implementation plans for, right? Will it be indeed for policy making or for people on the ground?
I think that's a very good question, and I think it's at the core also of the working groups. So that's also the main point of having these working groups work specifically on a topic. And as I said before, really establishing collaboration between member states and also other stakeholders. So this is something that we will be working on with these papers, and to be as concrete as possible, and also open in discussing and exchanging with stakeholders in the implementation, for instance, of the territorial just transition plans.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. Okay. There are also questions about how these groups look like. I understand that the first step has been taken, the start has been taken, and that there will be discussions later in the week. I also understand that the composition will also be shared on the website, which is, by the way, still under construction. We were working on a brand new website and an improved website for this, but all of that is in process. But it's a nice bridge also to actually go into the groups, and we have several colleagues already who have been selected to work with us on the group. So Elodie, if you can stay with me on the screen, I think we'll talk through the various working groups together. Then we need to be a little bit aware of time, because indeed time is now flying. We can spend some time, but colleagues, we are just about 10 minutes behind schedule, so it's good to be concise in going forward. Elodie, I think we're going to start with the stakeholder group, right, that you will be chairing. And I think you got somebody from that group already arrived who can perhaps also share some thoughts on the questions that are keeping us all busy.
Exactly. Thank you, Jan. Indeed, we wanted to have also this Q&A session as a bit dynamic and also interactive, and also take this as an opportunity to invite working group members to say a couple of words also about their organization and also their motivation in joining this working group. So I'm pleased also to invite on this stage Miroslava Stepien, from Bankwatch. So Bankwatch, as you may know, is a network of environmental NGOs whose members are really actively working on just transition, and especially on the implementation of the total just transition plan, focusing, of course, on Central and Eastern Europe. Maybe 2 questions for you, Miroslava. First of all, welcome. I'm happy to see you on stage, and I'm happy also to pose you these questions, and glad that you're also a member of this working group. Perhaps 2 questions. First is, why did you decide, or why did Bankwatch decide to join this working group? What did motivate you? And also, second question, what are your expectations of this working group?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, the decision came because, as you mentioned yourself, we represent and cooperate with civic society in various Central and Eastern European countries, in coal regions and in carbon-intensive regions. And we decided that we want to participate in the preparation of various relevant documents. We want to share our expertise and experiences because we have this unique, I would say, access to information on the ground level of what is going on in the regions, while simultaneously also transferring this knowledge both to the national levels within the countries and to the international level within the European Commission. We also very frequently translate or interpret the various decisions or documents that are created on the European Commission level, and refer it further to the ground level, to even the smallest ground level, such as municipalities, SMEs, and civic society on the ground in such regions, building their capacity. So I think in many ways we are actually doing what the working group is specifically supposed to be doing. We want to facilitate the exchange of such information between the various levels. We want to make sure that there is a multilateral and complex diagnosis and analysis of the situation in these various regions, and that we make a real attempt to answer the challenges and provide support, as we've already I would say mapped out a lot of the problems that we can see on the ground, so we can provide specific information about what issues we are seeing within some of the smaller municipalities, or among some of the less heard stakeholders, or the more vulnerable stakeholders in different regions. We're also very much set on maintaining high climate ambitions, and coherence between the various funding and plans that are being set into motion within the scope of the European Green Deal. And I think that's all from me, as we know that we have limited time. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present myself during this meeting.
Many thanks, Miroslava. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to working with you and the rest of the members of this working group. Thanks very much. All right, and I think we can move to the other working group, and I'll invite again my colleague from the Secretariat, Jan-Philippe, to introduce and present the working group member.
And perhaps before Jan-Philippe giving you the floor, there is in the chat an interesting question, because you said in your introductory statement, let's share good practice. And well, that is easier said than done. And immediately the question is in the chat, what methodology to use when selecting good practice? Good question, but that in 1 minute, of course. And of course, you have an honorary guest also with you. Over to you, Jan-Philippe.
Yes, thank you. I will keep the answer short. We will be in touch on this for sure. The working groups are one element, but there will be others in order to identify the good practices around. And as I said, promising practices will also be considered, because we're in this process right now. And so we need to have some time to identify successful models that can also be replicated. And with this, over to our next guest, and I'm very honored to have Emma Argutyan here from the European Chemical Employers Group, and she will be joining us in the first circle. Emma, you already heard the questions that my colleague Elodie was raising with regards to the horizontal stakeholder group. Now we're talking about the chemical sector, and a sector that you have been working in for quite some while. So the question is quite similar. Why did you decide as ECEG to join us in this exercise in the working groups? What is the key motivation? And maybe also what are your expectations with regards to the outcomes? What should we achieve?
Yeah, Philip, I think there was an element of suspense because Emma was not visible, but Emma is now back. So I hope Emma has heard the question already. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and sincere apologies for the technical problem I had, which is the
It was just suspense, you know, it was fine.
Thank you so much. Very quickly to the questions that Elodie has kindly asked to respond to. Well, we've spoken and Jan has very well outlined the challenges that the chemical sector is facing. Just to add to what he said, we know that chemical industry is actually facing a quadruple transition, which is climate neutrality, is circular economy, digitalization, and the implementation of the chemical strategy for sustainability. So in order to meet all these four challenges, actually, we wanted to join the Just Transition Platform. We're very grateful that we have been selected into the first circle of experts because we represent the employers' interest in the chemical, pharmaceutical, rubber and plastics industry on the EU level, and we're a recognized social partner together with Industrial Europe, and I see my colleague Judith here on the screen. And together with Industrial Europe, actually, we want to make sure that just transition happens in the chemical sector, that there are no people left behind, and that together with our social partner, we work towards implementing not only ecological, but also economic and social needs of the society in this transitional period. Here I will stop, and I thank you very much for your attention, and apologies for being late.
Fantastic, thanks very much, and we look forward to collaborating. Isn't it, Jan? Is there anything you can already say, Jan, about the composition? I know that for technical and possibly also privacy reasons, I don't know, we cannot disclose the list now, but what type of members are lining up for this group actually? Can you say something about it? And also, yes. Is there still a possibility to join that group?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm really excited about the composition of our group. We have knowledgeable experts from the European level, but also from the local level, from the scientific community, but also, of course, from the industry, all memberships. So we have a variety of experts already lined up, and of course we are open to look at further applications, but we have already a quite group together that we are looking forward to work with, and with no further opening the box of members, I would give back to you, Jan Martin.
Okay, thanks very much. That's yet to come. We have more groups, and Elodie, what is next in our order? Over to you.
Yes, indeed. So moving from chemicals, now we go to steel. I'm going to invite again my colleague Johannes from the JTP Secretariat, with now another member also from industrial, this time Judith Curtin-Darling. Please, Johannes.
Yes, thank you again, Elodie. Yeah, I would like to introduce Lydia Greco to you. She's an associate professor in economic sociology and labor processes at the University of Bari. Buongiorno to Bari. She works mainly on spatial and industrial change, also from an international perspective, and she's currently involved in a Horizon 2020 project on creative industries, cultural economic production networks. Complicated title, but I think very interesting insights which could be also helpful for our platform work here, and maybe you can give us some of these very short insights, or just let us know what your expectations regarding this work in the coming months are.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I work in, as Jans was saying, at the University of Bari, and Bari is in southern Italy and is in the Puglia region, where the largest European steel plant is in operation, which is Taranto, and with all the problems that you know very well. Well, I'm convinced. I mean, the commitment of the European Union to transit to a sustainable and climate-neutral economy is an extremely ambitious decision. We will have economic as well as a social impact. It will change production processes, but also lifestyles. And so, as it has been said, the challenge is economic, is ecological, but it's also social. And I think, and I'm convinced that, and that's why my organization applied to participate, that the knowledge we have on the steel industry, on steel-dependent communities, on steel workers, might be beneficial to build a different model of policy change, one that hinges upon a better knowledge of processes and impacts, on good practices, but also, on socially inclusive decision-making and implementation. I really believe that efforts should be made, and I think that the launch of this platform goes in that direction, that efforts should be made to ensure that political decisions remain sensitive to the well-being and dignity of people and territories most affected by the transition. All too often policy is perceived as distant or that doesn't live up to expectation. So I expect that this working group on steel might contribute to reinforce, to promote a multi-dimensional understanding of just transition, provide a method for stakeholders' involvement, but also I think encourage, I think this is quite an important point, encourage consistent and long-term policy programs. Because ultimately I also think that it would be extremely valuable if this working group could promote a fairer and more equitable model of development. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay. I mean, just a reflection what comes to mind when I listen to these interventions, also from your wise words, that indeed the working groups seem to have the potential to really, let's say, bridge the gap between what's going on at a very local level, and we heard that from the previous speaker. Indeed, the local communities and those where there's a lot of vulnerability, and the policy level. And I think we just heard also indeed that there is often a limited trust and confidence in the exchange between those. And there's perhaps a unique opportunity for these groups to really link the knowledge from the ground with and to inform the policy. But that's of course also something I'd say for the working groups themselves to also figure out in a way, because I mean, perhaps it has not been stated enough, but the working groups are an initiative, of the Commission, but it's really up to the members and those who take part in the group to shape up the work that they consider best, right? Isn't it? Because that's an interesting point, right? It's not something like rubber stamped, like here's a working group, a mandate, you go. There is this element of, I mean, everybody talks about it, co-creation, right, these days. Is there something you can say, perhaps a word about that? And then also, of course, then, last but not least, we have one more working group to present, right? So, Elodie, what do you think?
No, absolutely. I fully agree. This is the whole point, I think, of having these working groups is really to involve and be also as inclusive as possible. Also looking at the composition of the working groups. This is the main aim, and also to have a balanced representation also across between different stakeholder categories. And the whole idea of having these working groups is really to engage and really discuss on an equal level, and so that all members and all stakeholders involved are participating to the discussion. So really, this is something that is really important, and we'll make sure to implement during the different months and years ahead.
Absolutely. Okay. Last but not least, we're not going to forget cement today at all. So it's a real pleasure to have Katja with us from Wuppertal, right? Katja, you also brought a distinguished member with you, right? And it's very good to see as cement is really different. I mean, cement is actually everywhere and it's also there to stay. So the challenges for cement also quite different, as we heard, from steel or chemicals and the other one. Over to you, Katja. Good to have you with us.
Yes, thanks, Jan Martin. Good afternoon, Judith Curtin-Darling. A very welcome to you and your organization, Industrial Europe. Judith, you will be one of the representatives of the Cement Working Group, and I think it's an honor for us to have you within this group, because you have done a lot of issues on Europe, but also on different NGOs, and I'm excited for you for your answers on these questions. What did you apply, and what will be your expectations on that?
Thanks very much, Katja, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this meeting this afternoon. In fact, as Industrial Europe, we hedged our bets across all of the working groups, and we're very keen and very happy to have been accepted to participate in the first circle in all 4 working groups. And that's because this transformation that we're part of already is a radical transformation for our members across carbon intensive regions and across the whole economy. And we were particularly keen to be part of this working group on cement, where we represent cement workers in Europe at the same time alongside our sister federation representing building and construction workers, because of the situation which particularly faces the cement industry, which is different to the steel industry, where we also have very many members, or the chemicals sector or other energy intensive industries. And that's because part of this challenge is a question of investment. We know that half of Europe's cement kilns will need renovating or upgrading in the next 10 years. So the 2030 target for Europe and the framework, the legislative framework at European level, will have a major impact in terms of the future of the cement industry. And the cement industry supports many jobs in regions where there are maybe not big clusters like you find in the Ruhr or like you find elsewhere. So it's a very different sector. And what we want to see as unions, and I think that's been fantastic to hear in this session this afternoon, is that European policy really puts people in place right at the centre of just transition. For us, that means ensuring that workers are seen as actors and not recipients of public policy, that we're able to co-design the future of our workplaces, our industries, our regions, and that this really is a story where people have a stake in the transformation. And in that way, we hope we'll avoid the terrible lessons of the past, which we can all list the examples of where transformations have been brutal. There has been bad restructuring. It's had catastrophic social impacts lasting for a very long time. I come from the northeast of England, a former mining region, where the social and economic impacts are still there today of the closure of pits 20 and 30 years ago. That's what we want to avoid in this transformation. And so for us this afternoon, just 2 last words, really important for us that we've identified collectively in the Just Transition platform that we have to improve the data about employment. Where are the workers today who are impacted by the transformation? Because we can't negotiate anticipation agreements with our employer counterparts if we don't have clear views on where the workers impacted are. So data is very boring, but it's very, very important in this transformation. And secondly, we need more exchange of best practices. We're collecting across Europe concrete examples of how this transition is being negotiated by workers, their employers, because we want to promote an ILO definition of just transition, which is negotiated just transition. And therefore, we're keen to feed that into the work of the working groups, and we're really looking forward. We're ready to go. So we're looking forward to these first meetings to then join the conversation with everybody else around the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. And it's very interesting to listen carefully to what you said, but also what we heard from Jan earlier. These are not only energy, carbon intensive industries, they're also capital intensive industries with extremely long investment terms, right? So you said indeed investments into the cement industry now are shaping the pattern of the industry. Well, my understanding is for the next 30, 40 or 50 years, can you think about it? So any investment now would basically shape the way we produce cement until 2070. That is way beyond 2050. So it really means that we got to get it right now and indeed not wait, right? That's very, very interesting to hear. And also the term negotiated just transition, I also noted that one down. Thanks very much, Katja and Judith. So it's very good to have this overview. Perhaps Elodie, you can stay because I seen and I sense that there are questions in the chat, but also outside of the chat on how is this going to work, right? I think that's very good, Elodie, if you can stay on stage indeed, because I think you have a best overview of how these groups are going to work. So there was already a question about composition that's going to come. Can you say something about composition? I mean, for instance, you know, how many have you also actually not accepted, or is everybody welcome? I mean, perhaps just one thought is that many times in this kind of working groups, people say, oh, you know, not another working group. I don't have time for that. Or people say, well, you know, I can't be part of it. So there seems to be a very strange feeling about it. And I think the solution that I hear from your presentation is that actually there are several levels of involvement, right? So if you want to follow what's going on, you can join a third or a second circle. And if you really want to contribute, make an impact, then the first circle is there. But perhaps a few more words on membership, because that's of course going around in the air, right? So I don't know how much we can say, but you know, we want to be transparent and open there, right? So it's good to work on that. Over to you.
Sure, I can say a couple of words indeed. So indeed, having this idea of 3 circles was really about giving the opportunity to anyone who is interested in the work of the working group to be involved or informed, depending on your level of experience, but also expertise, but also willingness, motivation, and capacity, of course. So if you are interested in being informed by the work of the working groups, I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. We have a subscription form available on the website of the European Commission. Hopefully one of my colleagues from the Secretariat will copy-paste the link on the chat so that you can subscribe and so you can be informed about the work of the working groups. You can also email us, email the Secretariat of the Just Transition Platform. So it's secretariat@justtransitionplatform.eu, and then we'll be happy to reply to any question you may have. But coming back to the membership, indeed, we received many applications actually to be part of the working groups, and we have different levels of involvement. So having the first circle with really the core members and active members on the working groups to really be dedicated in working and drafting also the different papers I mentioned before, so the scoping paper and the implementation paper. And then if you want to be informed but still be, for instance, involved in the consultation phases, you can join the second circle of the working groups. But if you want to have any more information, please don't hesitate to contact the Secretariat. We'll be happy to provide you with an answer.
Okay, fantastic. And I think also you mentioned already in the presentation, the working groups will meet several times a year, right? Back to back to the overall working group. So that will be, I believe, 2 times a year, right? That's the idea. Well, for the moment, it's all virtual, right? I mean, I think, I don't know, is there foreseen also that we will meet physically, or is that yet for later?
I hope so, that for next year, for the first JTP event next year, we will be able to meet in person.
Very good. And I also understand we'll be working towards these implementation plans, right? And then also work on action. So it's a quite practical work, but connecting the insights really from all stakeholders. And I also understand that stakeholders, the members themselves, can really have a say in the way you're working, right? So not everything is carved out in stone, as I understand.
Absolutely. Co-construction is the key word, and maybe one thing which is important that I would like to highlight is that during each JTP event we'll be able to update participants in the work of the working group. So do keep we keep in touch at least twice a year during the JTP events.
Yeah. Last question. I mean, it may be that when you look at the 4 groups, it may look a bit strange. We got steel, we got chemicals, we got cement. And then you got stakeholder engagement, right? But it's all about stakeholder engagement. So is there a link? Do these working groups relate to each other, or can you say something about the interlinkages? Because that's of course important too, right? Especially as we see some members actually, joining several of the working groups, and there should not be overlap, of course, either.
Exactly. So we will work in a coordinated manner. Of course, we will not work in a fragmented way or on silos. The point is also to make sure that there's interaction and exchange between the different working groups. So we will make sure as Secretariat to make sure that there's exchange and coordination between the working groups. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Looking at that time, I think it's time for the conclusions. Very difficult. Perhaps Sander, you can help, because Swapcard is ruthless lights. It will kill us in probably 4 minutes from now. So I mean I have a few messages, but it would be very good if you can help on those, because of course so much has been said. What I really like what you said at the beginning yourself, Sander, is that these sectors are not to disappear, but they are there to transform, right? Which really sets this work apart from the work that is done in the parallel work stream on coal regionalization, right? We also heard that there are 2 things that really matter. One is, the employment impact, and the other one is the CO2, the emission impact, and they can be coming together. But where indeed they come together, where there is an enormous challenge, and when there's much employment involved, then of course, there's a lot of work to be done to prevent, what we heard, terrible, reconversions, traumatic transitions that Europe has gone before, right? So this is really an opportunity to get it right with the next level of conversions, right? And we also heard that the transition is really region specific, that there are many regions affected across Europe. They can be in Central and Eastern Europe, but also we saw in Southern and Northern Europe. So there really is need for granularity and so on. We heard about the working groups, the willingness to have an inclusive approach, to be open, transparent. There is an element of co-creation. So those who are a member, especially in the first ring, can really help shape the work. And it's very practical work, focusing on pathways to transition, implementation plans that can help, on the one hand, people on the ground, and on the other hand, inform policy making as well. These are, I think, a few messages I took out. It makes me very excited about this work. And we heard from Elodie, there's plenty of opportunities still to reach out to us and to engage. This is just the start of a process, right? Just wondering, Sander, whether you took out other messages that are very different, or whether you would like to compliment. Over to you. Yeah. Muted. We're muted. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. You're still muted. Yeah. You're still muted. Yeah.
Can
yes.
you hear me now? Okay. So thank you, Jan, and thank you everyone for really an excellent session. It's good to see that there is so much interest among the members, among the audience in this topic that we consider to be really underdeveloped in the debate on a just transition. And it's very good to see already and to know some of the members of these working groups. I really endorse the comments made by Judith that we need to know more about the workers that are in these carbon-intensive industries. This is something that we see in the draft territorial just transition plan, where in some of the coal regions, for instance, we know almost to the individual how many people are employed, where, what is their age, their skills profile, their gender, and this is not the case for the carbon-intensive sector. So this is why we have the working groups also. We need to know, as you said, the regions and the sectors, so we need all stakeholders on board. Please join if you think you have something to contribute. I'm very much looking forward to the first meetings this week. Please also join us tomorrow afternoon when we have the transatlantic session, which focuses specifically on steel. I think this will be an excellent inspiration for all of us as well. And as Elodie said, we will keep you closely informed, including at the JTP events, about these working groups. So thank you again to all.
Thank you very much all, and looking forward to working together with you on these exciting topics, and have a great days in this week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.